Welcome everyone to our regular council meeting for Wednesday, May the 26th. And we'll just wait my clock says 6:59, so we'll just wait 1 minute and then we'll get started. All right, the hour is 7 o'clock and we have quorum. So I'll call this meeting of Innisfil Council to order on Wednesday, May the 26th at 7 o'clock. And we'll start first with our opening statement about the fact that we are audio and video recording this meeting, and it shall form part of our record, which will be retained in accordance to the town's retention bylaw. And for more information, you can get from the clerk's office, and ask everybody if they would please mute their microphone when they're not speaking. That would be very helpful in keeping our meeting going forward. So we'll ask for the open forum, which is the first item. We have no items in open forum this evening. So we'll go to the approval of the agenda for tonight. We have two delegations that we'd like to add to the agenda with council's concurrence. And also I would like to ask council's concurrence not to add something, but to move something. So item C1, which is the community safety and well-being plan, I would, if we could move that item to go right after the presentation, 5.1. Ms. Warner is very busy consulting with 17 municipalities for this plan, and she's doing double duty. So it'd be great if we could deal with her item and then let her go early. Any other comments about the agenda repair? Seeing none, all those in favor, or sorry, I need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Fowler and Deputy Mayor Davidson, all those in favor? That's carried. So next is disclosures of interest. Is there any disclosures of interest? I'm seeing none, but if one becomes apparent to you, please bring it up at any time. And then next is presentations and petitions. So very excited tonight to introduce a presentation by Carrie Warner and Sandy Foster about South Simcoe's Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. And over to you, ladies.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having us here tonight and the opportunity to present your South Simcoe plan. So we'll move to the next slide, please.
Great. Hi, everyone. So in the next few minutes, we'll be looking at why we're doing this planning, who's involved in the planning, the process to date, and what the process will look like moving forward. The areas of risk that have been identified within community safety and well-being plans across Simcoe County, and of course locally for our South Simcoe plan. And of course, we'll be talking about what the next steps are. Next slide, please.
So why are we doing this planning? So really there's two pieces to this plan. There's the mandate under Bill 175, which has mandated that municipal councils are required to prepare, adopt, and post their plan by July 1st, 2021, and you'll be in good position to do so if you choose. And then there's the next piece about why this planning is needed and why it makes sense. So we know that police often find themselves responding to calls that are not criminal in nature with no chargeable offenses, and they often get referred out to community partners and community supports to help those ones. So really, if it's done well, if community safety and well-being planning is done well, then it will unite partners on intersectoral strategies that address social development priorities. And if you see the screen, the green ring is the social development ring. And the idea is if we focus our attention there, then we're going to shrink the rest of those rings. And we'll make sure that these risks are addressed by the most appropriate community partners, and better yet, mitigated. So we'll move to the next slide.
We want to highlight that diversity, equity, lived experience, and inclusion will create the foundation for how we will approach each strategy within each of the identified priorities within our community safety and well-being plan. Next slide, please.
So this is looking at who your partners are involved in the planning, and the light gray boxes are the membership or the proposed membership. And from left to right, you can see that the GMCC is in place now and will remain in place in phase 2. And really that's the group that is responsible for the oversight and the governance of the local plan. And then forming in phase 2, you have your local community safety and well-being table, which is really going to be doing the kind of the heavy lifting and leading the implementation of the plan. And you can see the proposed membership there. And then we have a steering committee, and there's a visual a few slides from now that's going to help maybe pull this together a little better for you. And that's where you would have somebody from the South Simcoe local planning table represented at that county-wide steering committee. And really their role is the strategic oversight and, you know, making sure that processes align and we're not duplicating, and that we're streamlining our practices where possible and supporting joint planning initiatives. And then you have your advisory body, and your advisory body has been in place since we started this planning. And those are your subject matter experts around the areas of risk that we're going to show in a few slides. And they're really they're still going to be intact, and they're going to be supporting all 5 planning groups. So South Simcoe is one planning group, and there are 4 other planning groups across the county. And there's one advisory body because often those members are supporting county-wide initiatives. And so it wouldn't make sense to have individual advisory bodies for each planning group. And so they'll remain in place, and they're very excited to support this work. And then on the far right, you have other existing planning tables and maybe advisory committees of council, local groups that are working in this area, and they will be certainly aligned with our work and linked into the plans. Next slide, please.
So as municipal partners in the South Simcoe Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan, town staff have provided support during phase 1 by helping to shape how the plan has come to be and making it ready to share with you today for approval. And we've also been heavily involved, or will be involved, during phase 2. So helping specifically with steps 1 through 5 that you see laid out on this slide. And it really speaks to how we'll be working with a collaborative model during phase 2 to support implementation efforts throughout and across all of those identified priority areas. Next slide, please.
So this is how we approached phase 1, which is the phase up until this point, up until the adoption and posting of your plan. So we're very proud of the fact that the areas of risk were identified by data, so evidence-based, and that was a very extensive process. And if you take a peek into the plan, it's laid out the steps that we went through, and it was very comprehensive. And we actually had the health unit lead us through a prioritization matrix, and it was quite involved, but quite objective. And then from there, we identified the areas of risk, and then we validated it. And we did quite an extensive stakeholder engagement over the course of many months, obviously virtually because of COVID, and presentations to various groups and tables that already exist that are working around these areas of risk. And then we did the community engagement through an online survey that ran between mid-February and mid-March of this year, just to capture the residents' thoughts around these areas of risk, and really to help to inform the strategies as we were working to build them out in the plan. Next slide, please. So these are the 8 areas of risk that were identified across the county, and the local plans, so the local planning groups, and so Simcoe being one of them, each planning group is going to focus on between 3 and 4 areas of risk. Interestingly, but not surprisingly, all 5 plans had identified mental health and addictions as a high priority. And I think it's important to note that all this data and the identification of risk was done just prior to COVID. And so we can appreciate that since COVID, all of these areas, if you look at them, have probably been negatively impacted. And so the timing of this planning is critical and I think welcome in many regards. Next slide, please.
Our local plan focuses on the 4 priority areas that you see here. So mental health and addictions, housing, income, and education. These, like Carrie mentioned, these priority areas were identified before COVID, and of course shared with Council in a presentation in the summer of 2020. Next slide.
So just touching on each of those 4 very quickly, not reading them, I'm sure you can read them and pick it up, but we're really looking at improving equity and access of and quality of mental health and addiction services. And the good news is that the government just this time last year, I think it was March 2020, they released their roadmap to wellness, and it's a mental health and addiction strategy. And part of the work that they will be doing, we will make sure that we align with that so that we're running parallel with them, and it will support our efforts. But some of the other pieces that we're looking at addressing is increasing knowledge and skills around harm reduction and trauma-informed approach, improving client and family engagement, building capacity for people to self-manage their mental well-being, and also supporting employers to support employees around workplace mental health. Next slide, please. So housing, we know that you're doing some incredible work around housing, and it's always a top of interest to advance affordable and attainable housing. And so one of the strategies is really just looking at those planning tools that municipal councils have at their disposal and optimizing them where appropriate and where possible. But a big piece of the housing is actually going to be focusing on housing stabilization support. So we know that it's one thing to try and create housing and connect people to housing, but then keeping people successfully housed is also a challenge that's often unseen by many, unless you're a community provider that kind of sees people entering the system again and needing support. So that's going to focus, we're going to focus our efforts on housing stabilization supports as well. And again, we're always going to make sure that we're in alignment with any current federal, provincial, and local homelessness and support access system strategies. Next slide, please.
The next priority area is income. So we're going to work to improve advancing income stability by addressing the urgent needs of our residents and looking at the mid to long-term sustainable solutions, such as providing residents with tools, skills, and knowledge to help them succeed in today's economy. And in the long term, working and aiming to work with businesses to develop and implement inclusive business practices. Next slide.
So education, often when we think of education, we think of, graduates from high school and then what their direction will be and their path they will take. But really, when we're looking at education, it's married so closely to employment, and that's also although it's not identified in this plan, we know you can't talk about education without talking about employment. And so we want to make sure that the pathway is clear for everyone, regardless of their age, to pursue education, because we know that people are going back and pursuing education later in life for various reasons, sometimes interest, sometimes necessity. So we want to really kind of map that out and figure out what the enablers are and the dependencies are that need to be in place for somebody to be able to participate in education and advance themselves that way. So we're really going to have a bit of a focus on skilled trade, because we know that that's an area that's in crisis and more of a looming crisis. And also the healthcare sector. A couple of other points just to kind of pull from this slide is looking at breaking down barriers to education. And those are some of the enablers that I talked about, whether that be language, literacy, discrimination, could be access, could be connectivity, and also looking at that perceived value of apprenticeship, because I think people have in mind, when they think of apprentice, they or skilled trade, they have one thing in mind, but we know that it might be very different what that looks like now. And so we just advancing that with the community partners to make sure that people have a real solid understanding of what the opportunities are. And again, the last bit is really looking at some of the populations or residents in our community that might be underrepresented in education and seeing how we can clear the pathway for them should they choose to pursue it. Next slide, please. So this slide is colorful slide, a bit of a busy slide, but it's giving you the big picture, and it really relates back to that fifth slide when we talked about who the community partners are and what their roles are. So it's probably a slide that you have to kind of take away and digest a little bit. But if you turn your attention to the left, that model of collaboration for phase 2, and phase 2 starts after July 1st, really after your plan is adopted and posted. And so you can see that the GMCCs, and if we take a look at South Simcoe, it's in the bottom right, that medium gray circle there, it's a GMCC. So that's that governance, group that's in place and will stay in place. And then you have that multicolored ring, and that's your local planning table. And those rings represent the areas of risk that this plan has identified. And then you see that darker gray circle that's connected to the ring in the center, and that's your representative from South Simcoe that will sit at that steering committee. And then you see your advisory bodies in the middle that's supporting all 5 plans. And I think it's important to know what the other planning groups are working on, because there's definitely areas of risk that some groups are working on and other groups are also working on. So we want to be able to get together on that. It might be different how you deliver that locally and what the strategies are and how you roll that out locally. And that's the beauty of the structure, is that we do have that local interest. But some of the overarching pieces that might be common can be worked on together so that there's no duplication in the system or in the process. Next slide, please. So this slide is really looking, if you see down the left, kind of those 8 areas of risk, and then some of the tables that already exist that are very sophisticated tables that are already doing intersectoral work around these areas of risk. So we don't want to duplicate anything. We don't want to run interference with it. We want to align our work with that and leverage the work that's already being done, and then figure out if there's decisions being made at kind of a county level, what does that look like in our own local community, and what should that look like, and be able to have a say in that. Next slide, please.
So the strategies that are within the South Simcoe Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan do align with many of the town's existing strategic documents that you see on this page. So the Community Health and Wellness Strategy, Inspiring Innisfil 2030, so the Community Strategic Plan, and of course the priority areas identified through the Community Needs Assessment process that we went through this time last year and continue to focus on as a municipality. The plan will really help drive these other town priorities and the work within them forward. Next slide, please. So the solutions to address these complex social issues are not linear, they're complex, they're very intertwined. And for that reason, we recognize the opportunity and the need to work collaboratively with community partners that already do such great work in these priority areas in order for us to make progress in each of these identified areas of risk. No one agency is responsible for residents' health, wellness, and safety, but of course, together we can affect great change. Next slide, please.
So what are the next steps? So should you choose to do so, adopt and then post your plan on or before July the 1st. And then after July the 1st, the next kind of big piece that will happen in order to kind of get the ball rolling is you're going to want to form that local community safety and well-being table. And that's going to be reflective. If you look back on slide 5, it kind of points you in the direction of who might be at that table. And then you think about your local, because we want this to be local. So what local organizations and agencies, representatives would be sitting at that table. And then once that table is formed, they can maybe self-identify someone from that table that will represent South Simcoe at that regional or county-wide steering committee. Next slide. And that's it.
Thank you, Ms. Warner and Ms. Foster, for that presentation. It was a bit of a whirlwind, but we have the full deck in our agenda, and it's very comprehensive. And I just wanted to take a moment and talk a little bit about, how we got where we are. So long before the province decided that they were going to mandate these community safety and well-being plans, we were introduced to our new chief of police. And when we met Chief Fletcher, he came to us and said, this is what has to be done. We have to look at these things to be proactive and do the things we need to do so that the police can be less reactive. And so I just wanted to give a moment to Chief Fletcher to talk about where we are and just how proud I am of this plan, and how, if you could brag a moment and just talk a little bit about how much in front we are of everyone else in Ontario on this.
So thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the opportunity just to address council. And as much as I thank you for your kind comments, it's also this council getting ahead of this 3-4 years ago. This work's been undertaken since 2017 and 2019. This council adopted an approval at that time to focus on community safety and well-being. And, the town has been so supportive of this, right from Jason Rayner getting involved in the first early adopters of the the work that had to be taken, and then passing the torch to Sandy. And we are so lucky to acquire the services of Carrie. You know, she comes with an amazing, you know, health and long-term care background. And, you know, when she was first introduced as model, I'm sure she wondered what the heck she was getting herself into, but she has embraced every part of the community safety and well-being strategy and moved it along to where we are today. And, you know, I can also share with you that one of the, what I would call the godfathers of community safety and well-being, Dr. Hugh Russell, who wrote papers on this back to 2005 and 2007, and has been trying to make this movement across the province. We shared with him our proposal and the plan, and he is so excited that that we have taken an evidence-based approach to our plan. I've spoken to people at our ministry around the fact that we have taken so much data from local data, provincial data, county data, national data, and then dissected it to find out what the identified risks are in our community, and then applying that to the matrix of this plan that we're faced with today. You know, we are one of the few that have done that. We haven't just gone out by way of survey and said, what do you think are the biggest issues and what do we need to focus on? It's evidence-based, and it will serve us well going forward when the province then says, okay, 4 years from now, how are you going to report on this? We'll have something to come back to report on those metrics, to say, hey, this is what the 2006 census data said. This is what the 2010 data, the 2020 data said. So again, I you know, as both Carrie and Sandy have said, this is very complex. You know, if this was easy work, everybody would have been doing it. And as Mayor Dolan knows, there's many municipalities are asking the government right now to postpone the July 1st deadline for this plan, to put it out even longer. But you know what, you know, pandemic or no pandemic, we've had lots of opportunity to work on these plans pre-pandemic. And there was a lot of feet dragging that went on long before, you know, unlike this council that said, yeah, let's get on it. Let's do what we need to do. So, you know, I applaud the work that has taken on. It is very complex. There's no single agency needs to be involved, and it needs to really be collaborative. And I think we've got an excellent plan ahead of us. You saw that multiple slide with all the rings that Carrie and Sandy talked about. That draws it all together for me, because it's not just one little bubble here and another bubble there. It draws it all to the middle, to the advisory council table, and everybody needs to be working together. And we've got so much good going on in our communities. We've got a lot to draw on, and I think we're set up for success going forward. So again, thanks, Mayor. Thanks to Carrie and to Sandy and to this council for supporting this so far. And I think we're in great shape to move forward in the next 4 years. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Chief. And I'll just say one other thing, and then I'll pass it off for comments to council. But back when Innisfil decided, well, Simcoe decided that we were going to go ahead with this, it wasn't long before the county of Simcoe said, hey, you know, those guys know what they're doing. Let's get on board with them. So all of Simcoe County jumped on board. And that's why we have the more complex strategy, but I think it makes sense going forward. So I've sung enough. I'm going to send it off for questions and comments of council now. Councillor Asadi.
Sorry, just had difficulty with my mic there. I want to say that, you know, when I started to see this report for 98 pages, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is lengthy. It was such an amazing read. The work that has gone into this, and as Chief Fletcher has said, that a lot of this work, it started in the beginning before the pandemic, and I think the timing of this was 2018, but the timing couldn't be better now. You know, to move into the next phase 2 with the pandemic, because, you know, the 4 priorities that you've identified, I think are just bang on. You know, the mental health and addiction, the housing, the education, and the income affect almost everyone, and more so. And there were certain points that I really found so interesting, you know, statements that, you know, for housing, what is considered affordable often is not. It's so true. And as counselors, we're hearing that everywhere now, that people can't find affordable housing, and holding property owners accountable for unsafe and poor living conditions. people will all endorse that. And it's no surprise to anyone about the, the increase percentage for first-time visitors to the food bank, but so many with young children. But, I like the end of the statement in this document about every resident has a right to be safe and well. And I so look forward to the collaboration, the partnership, and moving on to phase 2 for our community. And thank you for all the work that's gone into this. Perfect timing.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to say thanks very much for the report. I think it was very well done and timely, and I think it'll make us a much better community when it's fully implemented. I do have a question, though. I may not understand the scope of the report in its final context. So my question is that there's one element that seems to me to be missing from the report, and that has to do with the environment. And I'll give you 3 reasons why I ask this. Is that especially during the pandemic, one of the first things people noticed was green space. When that was taken away from us, the recreational offices, that had a huge impact in terms of how the well-being of our residents here. They really noticed the importance of that green space. So that was kind of comment number 1, is that the environment from that point of view is really quite important. When we also take a look at things that are risks in our community, we look at things like flooding in Bellure and in my ward. For every spring, those people, and fall, every spring, those people worry about their houses being flooded, and that creates huge anxiety amongst that population in our community. And we've been trying to do something with Lake Simcoe Conservation Authority, but again, it's a risk. It creates anxiety, which affects mental health of our community. And the last one I'll mention is climate change. Climate change is going to have huge impacts. It's a risk for our community, and it can have huge mental health issues down the road, and it affects employment. It affects health and long-term care facilities if they don't have air conditioning. The poor residents who don't have air conditioning, those types of things when it gets hotter and hotter. So I'm kind of curious why, since the environment has a huge impact on our mental health and well-being in this community, why it's not part of this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. Ms. Warner?
Yeah, I'm happy to address that. And I agree with all of your statements. And that is part of the challenge of creating a plan like this, because it's almost like everything's on the A list and nothing's on the B list. And it doesn't mean that the environment is on the B list. And I think that's where the opportunity is. So when we looked at the areas of risk, we actually used, we referenced a document that was created in 2014 through a working group of the Ontario Chiefs of Police. And it was looking at about 239 some odd indicators of community safety and well-being. And so what we did from there is that you can read it in the plan, a very extensive prioritization process. And there wasn't, I'll be honest with you, and I'm thinking back to it, because I'm really just reflecting back to it now for the first time in many, many months, there wasn't a lot of environmental factors on that. And so I think that your point should be taken forward for phase 2, because it doesn't mean that once we have this plan, those are the only things we're doing. You mentioned mental health and addictions, and we talked about green space. And we know that there's actually, sometimes there's what they call social prescribing, and doctors were writing prescriptions for what they call biophilia or something like that. And it's about spending time in green space and the impact that it has. There's enough studies on that. And so when we're looking at some of those elements, and you talked about risk and flooding, there's other pieces to this planning. And I think about some of the other communities that actually identified access to services. And so there's ways to take those important pieces and move them into phase 2 and have those conversations and figure out where they make sense and how they align, and then bringing in the right partners. One of the groups that I spoke to was Just Recovery Simcoe. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but they had a focus on the environment too, and they could see where we were going with this plan, and we talked about opportunities in phase 2. So I wouldn't want this conversation to just get lost in this one meeting. I think there has to be the advocacy of taking those points that didn't come up in the initial planning into phase 2, because that's really when, kind of like the rubber hits the road and you start deciding on what's a priority. And that's why there's the opportunity for the local piece of this. What is important to the residents in Innisfil? And so you've raised a few things, and I think that should be carried into phase 2 and figure out where they fit and how they match up to the strategies. So I'm not sure if that answered the question, but I'm glad you raised it, because I think it should be kind of earmarked, and I'm sure Sandy's taken a note of this, that she'll be involved in the phase 2 planning, that these are conversations that need to be had with the right partners at the table. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. I think you did address the question, and I hope it does fall somewhere in phase 2, because so often when it comes to the economy and other issues, the environment is always considered separate, but it's an integrated component of all those things, and so finding a way to build that into that plan in phase 2, I think is well warranted, and also considering the kind of the vision for Innisfil in terms of being more sustainable also builds that environment piece into this plan as well. So again, thanks very much. I thought it was a really well planned. I just wanted to put that element for future planning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Waters. Other questions or comments? Councillor Ices.
Thank you, Your Worship. I agree with my fellow councillors. It was a very well written plan. I like all the different aspects that it covered. It's very comprehensive, and I like the fact that it was evidence based. But because of the complexity of it, I'm just curious how we're going. If you can give me a sense of how you're going to measure how the plan is going, what kind of metrics can you focus on? Can you ease some of that complexity to make it into evidence that we can see where we are as we follow through on this? It sounds like a lot of the information was taken before the pandemic, so I have a bit of a concern that we're starting behind and we don't know what that evidence is, so then it becomes more difficult to measure. So I just
sure, I'm happy to speak to some of that. So every area of risk starts with something similar. The first thing for each area of risk is mapping out a continuum. You probably saw that every area of risk asks you to map out a continuum. That's not an inventory list of what you have in the community. That's looking at that area of risk and looking at all the different verticals, like buckets with the verticals and boxes under them, of enablers for whatever the area of risk is. So those are like the best practices, what we would need to have in place to make improvement in people's lives related to that area of risk. So that's what we start with for every area of risk, so that we know what we're trying to work towards. Then we overlay that on the community. So we would overlay that on Innisfil, overlay that on Bradford West Gwillimbury, which is your planning partner in this, and see what we have in place, and then see where the opportunities are. And that's how you kind of identify some of your next steps as what you want to work towards. As far as the measurement of that, every plan has 3 priorities, and then there's strategic directions and goals under each. The 3 priorities are lifted right from the framework, the mandate. And the first one is intersectoral collaboration. The second one's around information sharing and knowledge exchange. And the last one is around data and performance measurement. And so that's what you're asking about. So when you get to that part of the strategy for each area of risk, the action or the goal is to identify between 3 and 5 impact metrics. And so as Sandy mentioned, when we got to the how do we measure this kind of slide, these are not, there's no one direct path to make improvement in education. There's no one direct path to make improvement with housing stabilization. And that's why it's complex and sticky. And I think that's where what's rooting you in this question is like, how do we measure that? So we know that there's not going to be one thing or one indicator that we look at to say, yes, we've made a change by doing A or B or C. So it's really about identifying. We have some baseline data, and I actually think that having done that data dive before the pandemic is actually a really good thing, because it gave us a baseline that was not artificially inflated by a pandemic. That was like real life when things were normal in the world, but not normal for many. And that's what the data says, that the world was not good for many. So we have that. I think that there's an opportunity to do a data refresh. Now, if you look at some of those indicators, they can only be refreshed so often because StatsCan isn't going to do it outside of their regular intervals. But there is some local data, and you'll also see that tucked into the plan, that we want to identify other data sets that are being captured that we don't know about that can give us some insight. And so there's a whole focus on like a heavy focus on data and performance measurement. And that doesn't mean that we're going to get bogged down in data. It just means that we're going to identify that we need to use data to be able to tell if we're making a difference. And that's where those 3 to 5 key impact metrics for each area of risk are going to become very important. We want to identify what those are so that we can start tracking them. And then the idea is you take those 3 to 5 impact metrics that you've identified per area of risk, and you put them all together towards a community scorecard. And that's how you're going to be able to track over time the impact that you're having with this work. Did that explain any of it maybe for you?
Yeah, yes, to me that's because of the complexity of all the different things you're putting under the wellness plan. My brain has a hard time figuring out how do you measure that, and
I know
you have explained that, so thank you.
There's a good line on I don't remember what slide it is, but it's on that how do you measure it slide, and it says that the goal is that the strategies when implemented will have a contributory rather than a causal relationship, because it's going to be impossible to say that it has a causal effect on something. But if you can see the needle moving in the right direction, you can then say, well, we did this, this, and this, and we can confidently say that we feel that it had a contributory effect toward improving community level safety and well-being. And the government's aware of this too, and we're not, I think we actually have a pretty solid plan in place as far as how we're going to measure it. I've seen some of the other plans released around the province, and it's not to critique them. They're very robust, they're good, but they are a little shy on how they're going to do that, because it's tricky, like you say. It's how do you commit to something on paper? And that's why I think we were conservative and realistic with how we said we were going to measure the impact.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Other questions or comments? Councillor Vimberko.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think that it's not only complex, but ambitious, and that we're working with, or we're going to be working with different data from before, during the pandemic, and after. And so, you know, we're not there, we're a long ways from being there, because we're just during right now and we're coming out of it. And I think that that's, you know, each stage of this is going to bring in different data, and it will affect what you've been doing in the past and how you're going to do it, and how you're going to come to conclusions in the future. Sort of, you know, because we started before this pandemic ever started.
There's a comment early in the plan that talks about we have our plan, we have our strategies, but we recognize that we're still in the pandemic and things will change, and we recognize that we have to be agile and nimble to that. And that's where taking some of that information that we may receive through data or just through you know, narrative, or just what we're witnessing, we will be able to kind of work with that. And so I think that that's important in the plan as well, to not just get locked in and kind of like zoned in on something and miss what's actually going on. So there's going to have to be an awareness of what's really happening, and to take any data that we have and be able to course correct or shift our focus if it makes sense.
And if I can, Mayor, through you, throughout this process, we also validated this even during the pandemic. So even though we gathered the data beforehand, Kerry went out during 2020 and even early 2021 with various surveys to the community, stakeholder engagement, and said, did we get it right? Is this what you're seeing? And it was validated during the pandemic, and amazing how much, you know, mental health and addictions and those issues became so loud and clear during the pandemic. So we're confident we're on the right track.
And I think you are as well, but you know, the world is changing, and you know, we're going to have to change with it. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you, Councillor. Other questions? Oh, Sandy, go ahead.
Through your worship to Councillor Van Berkel. I just want to mention that, or just reiterate that the beauty of this plan, I think, from the town and staff's perspective, is really that it's very in line with many of our existing strategic documents, specifically that of the community needs assessment. many, if not all of these priority areas or priority areas of risk laid out in this community safety and wellbeing plan are echoed within the priority areas that are identified or have been identified and remain a priority in the community needs assessment. So I think that approving this community safety and wellbeing plan will do nothing but add to staff's capacity and ability to really drive the work forward in all of these identified priority areas.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to make a comment. The one thing that stuck out in this report for me, and I've written beside the comment is, wow, I can't believe this. But correct me if I'm wrong, that 50% of our youth only have high school or less. And if that's true, that is huge ramifications for mental health down the road, education, employment, and everything else down the road. So it says, if that number is true, it's good that we've identified it, and that we need some serious work with our educational partners to help move that number down. Just comment that was one of the biggest things that stuck out in the report for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Other questions or comments? Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Your Worship. The one thing that stood out for me is the flexibility of everything, how everything, it has a ripple effect. You make it's very proactive in its approach. For example, with education, there's mention of the trades. So if you look at the mental health and addictions, for example, giving someone a purpose, a direction, educating them, giving them a skill set, increases the morale, it increases their mental well-being by feeling as if they're accomplishing more. The idea that they could get better income through a skill trade, which is in high demand right now. And then on top of that leads into housing where they can actually support themselves. Everything is so well interlaced and flexible that you can adjust here and there and still, have an overall effect. So I really think that there's a whole approach to it, which is very proactive, and I'm very supportive of it. I think it's amazing what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments? I have a couple. So without kind of raining on everybody's parade, because I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think it is an amazing plan. My only issue is if I was involved, I love education, I love mental health and addiction, and I love housing. I'm iffy on the income piece, because I just think that and that part of that is because of it's mentioned in one of the paragraphs. It's short of saying that we're going to advocate for basic income guarantee, but it talks about a definition from basic income guarantee, and then it talks about joint advocacy efforts. But I'm not a fan of that concept, although I know that the Simcoe Municipal District Health Unit is pushing it very hard. I believe in empowering people and giving them opportunity and supporting those who need it. But I'm not a fan of basic income guarantee. I spent time in the Soviet Union in the 80s, and I have lived experience, and I just don't think that that's something that will work here in Canada. But other than that, I'm hugely supportive of the entire document. Many of us have heard over the last year, defund the police. And much of that, the concept behind that has been that, put these things in place so that there is less police required in the future. And I'm sure the police, I don't want to speak for you, Chief Fletcher, but I'm sure the police, they're trying to put themselves out of business, right? Just like we go out for pitch-in day. We don't want to go up and pick up garbage. We do it because we have to do it. But really, we would prefer people don't litter in the first place. And I know that anything we can do that's proactive, that stops calls that go to South Simcoe that maybe they don't have expertise in, like mental health and addiction. I mean, I know they want that too. So putting this in place is step one before you can go to the other place. Police have to be there because nobody else is there. Nobody else is doing this. But if we get this in place and we do this first, you know, then we can look it down the road. Anyone else have anything? Ms. Foster.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think it's really important to mention that our role in improving the area, this priority area of income, will really be on affecting and hopefully improving the enablers or the precursors that allow people to meet their basic needs, such as income. And it's really also important to mention that we'll be building off the assets that already exist in the community to support our residents, and once again, meeting those urgent or those short-term and basic needs. And inherently, the priority area of income is really connected to the work that will happen simultaneously in other priority areas, such as education. And the work that is happening simultaneously in these other areas of risk will naturally connect to the work and hopefully the outcomes that we're achieving in the area of income as well.
Thank you, Ms. Foster. So we've had great discussion, and it's an exciting night because I know we've been waiting on this for a long, long time, and I'm so proud to be one of the leaders in the province. When I go to my AMO meeting tomorrow, I will be quite proud to say that we have ours completed ahead of the July 1st deadline, when other municipalities are still looking for an extension or producing a plan that says, fine, you want a plan? Here it is, one page, done. So ours is quite in depth and very well thought out. And I can't say enough about both Ms. Warner and Ms. Foster and Chief Fletcher for all of the work that you put into this plan. And it's something that even if there's a little piece of it that I don't agree with, I am 100% behind the entire plan. So thank you for that. So I would ask for a mover and a seconder to receive the delegation as information, and that would be Councillor Arsati and Councillor Van Berkel. All those in favor? That is carried. And if we could now move to item C1 and a mover and a seconder for the recommendation to approve the report. That would be Councillor Fowler and Councillor Nicol. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. And this will be one for the record books, and look forward to seeing those measurements and those matrix in the years going forward. Thanks, everyone. So next we'll go to delegations, and we have two delegations this evening. The first one is from Claire Malcolmson, and it's regarding item F1, the Bradford Bypass. Ms. Malcolmson, whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and hello, members of Innisfil Council. That was a fascinating presentation. So thanks very much for that work. Good luck. So I'm here to talk about the Bradford Bypass. I'm the Executive Director of the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition. I've spoken with you before. We're a lake-wide environmental organization looking at the health of the lake and commenting on policy and being a bridge between government and folks who love the environment but don't have the time to dig into all of the weeds. So it's great to see, next slide please. Great to see municipalities publicly discussing issues that are affecting Lake Simcoe. I think this is really important. So kudos to those of you who are doing that. So we just released a report with Simcoe County Greenbelt Coalition about a month ago called Lake Simcoe Under Pressure in 2021 to try to raise this issue that there are a lot of things happening in 2021 that could really negatively affect Lake Simcoe. We're concerned that there isn't proper oversight. There isn't provincial oversight. And so it really does fall to municipalities, I think, to really do your due diligence and try to make sure we're asking the right questions and getting the right answers before we say, this is okay. And thus, this really applies to the Bradford Bypass. So in our report, we list these items here, the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan review, which could be strengthened or weakened. We're a bit worried because we don't know yet. Pressure on sewage treatment plants around the lake, especially Upper York sewage system, the Orbit MZO, huge population increase near Lake Simcoe, and the growth plan, which is going to add more phosphorus to Lake Simcoe, which is already stressed. Like, next slide. The next slide, just focusing very quickly on two major stressors for the lake, climate change and phosphorus loads. So the phosphorus target is the red line. Our average of the last 10 years is double that. So we have a lot of work to bring phosphorus loads down to that target, which is set by Science Committee and the province. You may think that climate change isn't such a big problem in the Lake Simcoe area, but it is. This chart shows how flow volume, which is being driven by increased precipitation and these really intense storm events, those are driven by climate change, and that really heavy rain drives more phosphorus into the lake. So it's an issue that affects the lake. And then in terms of what we're doing to contribute to climate change, the LSRCA did a climate change mitigation strategy and identified that 54% of the total greenhouse gas emissions in the Lake Simcoe watershed come from transportation. That is largely just individuals driving their cars. And further, that the business as usual scenario will increase that by 57% in net emissions from the 2016 baseline. So that's the wrong direction. We need to do something different. And actually, providing affordable housing, as per the last slide, would help reducing people's need to drive, right? Building communities that people don't have to drive everywhere to get the things that they need every day. So a change in planning is needed. And in that context, a highway is something that we should press the pause button on and say, hey, climate leaders don't build highways. Let's get all the answers here. The Bradford Bypass is a really good example of a business as usual development that actually helps drive more emissions. It does not reduce emissions. Next slide, please. Other issue affecting Lake Simcoe, I've talked to you before about this, is natural heritage protection. So very quickly, this slide shows the natural features in the Lake Simcoe watershed that are very well protected by provincial policy. That same provincial policy, the provincial government seems happy to ignore sometimes when they want to develop in a wetland. Unfortunately, the Bradford Bypass would transect some of this very best protected land and weaken it in terms of its ecological health and contribution to the lake. So we're in a position here where, according to the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan, we're supposed to be increasing the amount of large patches of natural cover. Those that we have, we absolutely must keep intact. And so removing those is a bad idea. Next slide. So to that point, this is a picture of the Bradford Bypass taken from the route of the proposed bypass. You can see Cooks Bay there and the Holland River meandering along on the bottom left side of the frame. So just to contrast with the goals of the last map, this particular project is anticipated to negatively impact 22 hectares of high quality woodlands, 17 hectares of Holland Marsh, designated environmentally sensitive area, 9.5 hectares of provincially significant wetlands, and 32 hectares of significant wildlife habitat. So those are not things we're proud of. All of this goes against the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan. The aim overall with this highway is, of course, to connect Highway 404 to the 400. It's a proposed 16-kilometer highway with, it was first presented as 4 interchanges. The PIC meeting last week said maybe 6. And it sounds like they are even open to it being a toll road. So there's really a lot that is not known about this project. So I'm going to try to explain a few things here. So our organization, the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition, asked the Federal Minister of the Environment to review this project. That was not a successful request. The Highway 413 is getting a federal review. The decision to not approve the Bradford Bypass, I think, has to do more with politics and the very vocal council support for the bypass and not enough questioning. So I'm presenting information to you today that should make you at the very least question all the empty reassurances that I'm hearing that this will all be done just fine. And ideally not to support the motion from Bradford that's in your agenda, but rather ask the province for more diligence and transparency. There are serious issues with the province's approach. They gutted the environmental assessment process generally, and then they are trying to fast track this project, meaning that they are actually trying to exempt themselves from many of the studies that they keep repeating that they're going to do. So that's really the focus of what I'm talking about here. Next slide, please. I'm going to go through these ones really quickly. These are some of the public comments that I have a problem with, in that I think that they are misleading the public, and the MTO is really behind all of this. Just that finally, that Simcoe County has great confidence in the provincial environmental assessment process. I'll go through what that process is after these comments so you can see what I'm talking about. Next slide. York Region anticipates the current environmental assessment process will continue to address environmental, social, economic, and health issues, and as necessary public consultation to balance the needs for all community stakeholders. Next slide is Virginia Haxon and Rob Keffer, also basically saying the province is going to do all the due diligence and it's going to be fine, and I have lots of confidence. So either these officials have not, well, they seem to be just accepting what MTO is saying, and I understand in normal circumstances that would be a rational thing to do, but I am not just accepting what the MTO is saying because we're seeing some real misrepresentation of the truth. So we'll tell you why we're so concerned with the process. Next slide, please. So this is the route as planned. Already we're hearing 2 additional interchanges. It might not look that bad, but it's because you can't see the natural features on this map. 80 homes are going to have to be expropriated or acquired to build this, and people are really just starting to find this out now. Next slide. So here is the route, and you can see the natural heritage features and the wetlands that will be transected. 60% of this is in the greenbelt as well, which people who designed the greenbelt in the first place have a really hard time seeing the justification here. So the environmental assessment for the project was completed in 1997. The 1997 EA was superficial in nature. It did not consider cumulative impacts, climate change, or detail the impact on natural heritage, migratory birds, federal fisheries, First Nations, or discuss air pollution. Highway. The 2002 Notice of Approval conditions required upgraded studies on archaeological resources, of which there are some, stormwater management, groundwater protection, and noise and compliance monitoring. But then in 2020, the government of Ontario proposed to exempt the Bradford Bypass from completion of any environmental assessment updates and to exempt the project from all existing conditions of approval, including those mentioned above, for stormwater management and groundwater protection. The project is proposed to be exempted from further environmental assessment studies before construction begins on early works, such as bridges and water crossings. If the exemption is approved, there would be no further legally mandated public consultation or environmental assessment requirements under the Ontario Environmental Assessment Act. Anyway, it is, there's really very little to no provincial oversight should their own exemption request be approved. So it is, yeah, it's still online. I'm just going to mention a few more things. So many of the species at risk, potentially impacted, have been exempted by the Ontario Endangered Species Act. That was also changed recently. The project is also exempt from Conservation Authority approvals for wetland and floodplain development under the Conservation Authorities Act. There's no regulatory requirement that climate change or air pollution would be addressed. No air pollution approvals would be required. There is no indication that the proposed provincial study, if completed, would assess climate change, noise impacts, or impacts on migratory birds and fish habitat. Next slide, please. So the process is inadequate. The process appears to be build now, study, and mitigate as we go. The timeline makes no sense. The province's looking at early works in the fall of 2021. That's this year. So it was in the budget. They're going to start building the bridge. Meanwhile, the studies will not be complete until 2022. The MTO team misled York Region Council when it suggested it would complete all 15 studies prior to starting construction. I participated in the PIC. The consultation is misleading and shallow and one way. No one could ask questions. They cherry-picked questions. There was no mention.
Ms. Malcolmson, you're about 2 minutes over your time. If you could wind up.
So I have more in here as usual than I can talk about. There are slides in here that just show you what I'm talking about. Screen caps from the page, the Bradford Bypass PIC is the next slide, I think, showing they're saying we're going to do the Tesser. And then 2 more slides later shows you where the ERO registry is still online saying the project would be no longer required to complete a Tesser. So there are an awful lot of questions here. You can just go to the next slide, please. I had put together some wording for your consideration because I think that strongly supporting the Bradford Bypass, given what I've just told you, would be not really in line with the job of council, which I think is really to represent the interests of your constituents and safeguard the future, and not just approve something because your neighbor thinks it's a good idea. So thank you very much for listening to this. I'm really looking forward to the conversation and any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Malcolmson. Questions or comments from members of council? I have a couple, Ms. Malcolmson. So have you've gone to the PICs, you've gone to York Region, you've gone to Bradford, you've gone to East Gwillimbury, the people that are actually involved in this?
Well, no one can really go anywhere right now. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what you mean.
I mean, you've done this. You've done this.
No, you can only really do this because it's on the agenda. So thank you, Bradford. I mean, we're going to do this in Barrie because it's on the agenda there. I sent a letter into Ad Halitos Rontio.
So the municipalities actually that are, involved in this, East Gwillimbury, Bradford, York Region, there's no opportunity for you to bring your comments to them?
There may be, and if there is, I would like to do that. I just don't, I mean, this is Bradford's motion. They're asking for support from their neighbors. So, it's not on the agenda. It's hard to get in there.
I understand.
But I hear what you're saying. I would like to do that, yes.
And I'm going to ask you a personal question. You can choose to answer it or not, but okay. You have a residence in Innisfil, but your primary residence is in Scarborough.
Yeah.
When you're getting from Scarborough to Innisfil, what route do you typically take?
404 Green Lane, Yonge Street.
Okay. And so you go right through downtown Bradford?
No, I take Dissett Road, the existing
bypass.
Dissett. Yes.
The Dissett Road, okay.
That's the bypass. I mean, I have had a traffic jam issue there maybe twice. And as someone, I usually come for big stretches of time actually, but it's those cottage weekends that there is a little bit of traffic congestion. But I think the point is, you don't need a hammer to kill a fly. We would really just rather see the alternatives explored. I mean, putting a highway over Holland Marsh and provincially significant wetlands and forests when we're trying to protect them is really not a good idea. And I think that this project was killed already. So, let's just do it right. And that's what I'm hearing from councillors and from residents around the area is that they want the process to be a good one that they can count on.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, I want to thank you for being here, Ms. Malcolmson, and thanks for your delegation to us today.
Okay, thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night. Next, we have a delegation from, there was another person I understood was going to be here this evening. Councillor Nicol.
Your Worship, I think we need to move our seconder to receive the first.
Oh, sorry, mover and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Nicol. He's my procedure police. Moved by Councillor Waters, seconded by Councillor Van Berkel. All those in favor? That's carried. All right, and so now we have Ms. Ford. Ms. Ford, whenever you're ready.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. As a resident of York Region, I'm asking Innisfil Council to refrain from expressing support for the Bradford Bypass. The EA was initiated in 1997 and approved in 2002. The Greenbelt and Lake Simcoe protection plans did not exist, and climate change was not part of the conversation or evaluation. Only 3 public consultation sessions were completed during the late 90s on if the highway should proceed. The policy, social, environment, and economics are completely different today. To suggest that a 20-year-old approval for such a large infrastructure project on environmentally sensitive land is adequate seems implausible. To say that the province, York Region, and County of Simcoe have completed extensive public consultation is disingenuous. People impacted now were not old enough to be consulted or did not live in the area at the time. Transportation master plans show a line on a map. Justifying support for the Bradford Bypass because it has been on the books since the 70s is not an acceptable response. Why has York Region nor the County of Simcoe considered other regional solutions? York Region in 2008 lobbied the province to include the Bradford Bypass in the provincial growth plan. York Region initiated and requested joint studies be completed with the County of Simcoe, justifying the need for the Bradford Bypass. Staff from the Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority and York Region, both chaired by Wayne Emerson, have been silent and not provided any information to elected officials that would substantiate or refute public concern. In comparison, Peel Region and the TRCA have been able to provide staff reports on Highway 413 to inform the decision-making process. Both expressed concerns about the environment. Peel staff also expressed concerns about the loss of agricultural land and public health. They asked the MTO for an agricultural impact assessment and public health impact assessment. At the March 18th meeting at York Region, I was only given 5 minutes to speak, even though I requested and confirmed with the clerk that I would be given 10 minutes to speak to separate agenda items. It was at the chair's discretion. I was unable to depute on the Bradford Bypass, only Highway 413. Politicians have not been critical of the Bradford Bypass. Some have lashed out at members of the public who have expressed concern. I do not understand why, when the information gaps and lack of process are so blatant. The recently conducted Public Information Center on May 18th allowed for 3 hours, but was closed after 1 hour and 11 minutes. It stated that the province would complete all the necessary studies and public consultation prior to proceeding with early works construction. This statement is illogical. If all studies and public consultation are completed, early works construction is not needed. The province currently has no legislative authority to proceed with early works construction, and the project team has not responded to emails when asked. Every time I ask a question, I am told I will learn more at the public information centers or that it will be forthcoming in future studies. By the time these studies are done, it will be too late because the opportunities the MTO is offering for public consultation will have been completed. Project benefits are continually stated, but they are unsubstantiated. There are no references to support MTO claims. Essentially, the MTO is asking the community to accept the Bradford Bypass on blind faith. The current provincial government has shown a clear and utter disregard for environmental protection and literally demonstrated they are willing to rewrite provincial laws to do as they wish on environmentally sensitive land and do so retroactively to absolve themselves of wrongdoing. Reliance from the province for leadership on environmental protection and climate change is meaningless, and it's foolish to think or advocate otherwise. It is the province's project, but as we have seen with MZOs, the province needs municipal endorsement and support. The Walmart distribution and facility in Vaughan, approved by an MZO, approved paving over a small provincially significant wetland, in part because the wetland had lost its ecological value due to the MTO supervised construction activities on the adjacent Highway 400. The consultant for the MZO approving a warehouse on the Duffins Creek wetland argued, in part, that the development should proceed because the wetland had been degraded due to the presence of Highway 401. What will be the fate of the ecologically significant and environmentally sensitive lands surrounding the proposed Bradford Bypass B if it is built? What development will follow because the land has lost its ecological value, its ecological significance? The health of Lake Simcoe is not as well as the province would like the public to believe. The province has not met its reporting obligations under the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan. The impacts from the Bradford Bypass would be impossible to understand since the EA report is so dated and the health status of Lake Simcoe is not fully understood. The lake is under immense pressure and the Bradford Bypass would amplify an already stressed aquatic ecosystem. Supporting this highway without question states to the people of Ontario that Innisfil Council doesn't care about the health of Lake Simcoe, the green belt, farmland, meaningful action on climate change, or the health and well-being of their constituents. To be clear, the public is not telling you that you can't develop or build roads or that our cities can't grow or change. The public is telling you that you can't build highways on wetlands and you can't support sprawl on prime farmland, on lands that are imperative to source and stormwater protection. The public is telling you that building highways is not consistent with our true priorities and needs, that the focus on the highway distracts the discussion and resources away from developing and improving the built environment of our existing communities. We are telling you that we will not support our taxpayer dollars being spent on something that predominantly benefits private interests at the expense of public goods. This highway is not about improving transportation for residents. It's about improving transportation for the commercial and industrial sector, private interests. It's for goods movement. Please join the growing voices of strong local governments opposing development that reduces Ontario's ability to be climate ready and resilient. Please acknowledge that the ZA is so dated and inadequate that York Region and the County of Simcoe must start over, must look at alternatives and solutions regionally and provincially. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ford. Any questions or comments from members of council? I have one, if I could, Ms. Ford, just so you're from Vaughan. Have you ever been to Bradford?
I have an older cousin who lives up in Barrie, so I've come up that way before. I will completely admit that I'm not familiar with the traffic concerns. I've asked many people who I work with up there or who I was consulting with up there, do you experience traffic problems? Because to be frank, I haven't met a person yet who is living with congestion up there that would justify the need for building a 4-lane highway. I really am struggling to understand the need because I live in a very, very congested traffic community and I just can't see that you guys have the same issue up there. And I can't justify why we're spending provincial dollars up there to build that highway right now, other than it's for goods movement. It's for trucks and trailers. It is not for the public. And I really do not believe it's in the public interest to proceed with it at this time.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll ask for a mover and a seconder to receive the delegation from Ms. Irene Ford with thanks, and that would be Councillor Waters and Councillor Deputy Mayor Davidson. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you to both the delegations. Now we'll move to item 7, which is County Council updates, municipal associations, conservation authorities. I'm going to start because I always forget about them with the EOC update. If we could start with you, that would be great. Who's giving us the EOC update for this evening? EOC is the Emergency Operations Center update, and it would be Ms. Ray.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Council. The EOC update for this week is our updates from Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit. Dr. Gardner is seeing a lot of enthusiasm and positivity as vaccines roll out, but he stresses that we must remain vigilant to stay on this downward case trend that we're seeing. Hospitalizations continue to slowly decline. However, ICU patients remain consistent. Regarding vaccines, 52% of the adult population across Simcoe Muskoka has received at least 1 dose, and that's 43% of the total population. As of this past Sunday, 12 to 17-year-olds are now eligible. SMDHU is planning a targeted clinic for this age group. A number of pharmacies are now offering Moderna and Pfizer, and guidance has been released from the Ministry of Health for employers in managing employees with symptoms up to 48 hours after the vaccine. Regarding the reopening stay-at-home order, the province announced their 3-phase roadmap for reopening, which will use the percentage of adults with at least 1 dose of the vaccine as a basis for gradually loosening restrictions. If we continue this downward trend, it's expected that the first phase will be in effect by the week of June 14th. Outdoor recreational amenities, including boat launches and marinas, sports fields, splash pads, skate parks, etc., are now open to residents with restrictions. However, our splash pad in Cookstown is currently undergoing repairs, and we will share when it is reopened for public use. Access to Innisfil Beach Park boat launch is for residents only on weekends until June 27th, after which time we will switch to resident-only access for 7 days a week. Until then, non-residents can pay to access parking in the boat launch at Shore Acres on the weekends. Over the weekend, we had staff present at Shore Acres in Innisfil Beach Park boat launches and found 94% of people using these boat launches were residents. Operations and bylaw meet every Monday to discuss the previous weekend and the week ahead. So if we do find that we need to adjust, pivot, or change, we are ready to do so. Enforcement calls were received for parking and fireworks issues over the weekend, and we are looking into measures to inform the public about safe, responsible use of fireworks. Many parking tissues were issued over the weekend where vehicles were parked without a permit or parking on private property, including in the area around Innisfil Beach Park, 9th Line Park, 30th Side Road, Shore Acres, and Big Bay Point. We've seen an uptick in abandoned boats due to the higher than usual boating during the pandemic, and we continue to work with staff from SMDHU, South Simcoe Police, and neighboring municipalities on enforcement approaches. Our customer service team is taking appointments as needed while continuing to provide virtual and digital services and communication. There has been an increased demand for 2020 parking passes. So to relieve some of the pressure from our libraries that are currently giving out the passes, our customer service team is starting to provide parking passes by appointment at Town Hall on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. That's all.
Thank you, Ms. Ray. Questions or comments about the update? Anybody's experience over the weekends? Councillor Davidson is going to take the EOC meeting tomorrow for me, as I have a conflict. So if you've got anything that you want him to bring forward, please send him an email. Thank you. The only thing I would add to that is our active cases are going down, but it has been the tradition that about 10 days after any holiday, they start to peak again. So fingers crossed that we don't have that same uptick after this past holiday weekend. Any other updates? Councillor Waters?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just going to mention that on this Friday, as you know, I sit on the Board of Directors for the Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority. I will be making a presentation to the Board of Directors around passive house design. And I will be highlighting some of the things that we're doing around with the Habitat for Humanity and also hopefully the Orbit. But they are in the process of coming up with a design for their new education center. And I've mentioned to them the benefits of passive design that we're introduced to here. So I just want to let the everyone know that we will be presenting that to them, and hopefully that all of those other directors who sit on the board will take that same message to their municipalities and will follow up on the lead that we've already started. So just a quick word on that.
That's great. Congratulations and good luck with that presentation. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. County Council this week, we had our meeting yesterday, and one of the biggest issues, I'm hearing somebody else in the background, Your Worship. Somebody's mic is on.
Maybe it's mine. I'll turn mine off.
Okay. Yes. County Council is, we had a discussion regarding our county forest in Simcoe County, the recreation vehicles that are trespassing into our county forest, doing damage to our forest, litter, and various other activities. And as you know, in Innisfil right now, in the 7th line, we're having some issues there. We had some issues on Big Bay Point this week with ATVs and dirt bikes. And I'm surprised the one guy on Big Bay Point Road wasn't killed on Friday night. He's just was out of control. So I think as we move forward, I've had discussions with some of our staff that maybe in the future council, we may have to consider the use of ATVs and dirt bikes on our roads. So county has decided to hire outside security to monitor our forest and to prevent people from trespassing on these properties with these vehicles. That was my main thing from the county this week. There are many other things coming up, but we'll hear about them and different activities at county as we move into June. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Anyone else? I would just quickly add to the deputy's county update that this week is Paramedic Services Week. So we're celebrating our paramedics who've been on the front line this entire pandemic and certainly been doing a fabulous job and you know, much more volume that they're used to, not only normal calls, but also transferring patients from overwhelmed hospitals to hospitals that are taking other patients and moving them around. We're also working on celebrations for the 100th anniversary of the insulin of Dr. Banting in Alliston. So there's going to be I think something going on virtually on May the 29th there. So we're celebrating that anniversary. And also the Municipal Comprehensive Review, which is a process that all municipalities that are captured in the provincial places to grow plan in order to conform with the county must conform with the provincial places to grow. So we're going through that process now, and there will be a public meeting at the County Council on June the 8th. If anybody's interested, they can join in. All right, seeing nothing else, then we'll move to the consent list for this evening. So we'll go through this list for those of you who haven't been at our council meetings before. These, all of these items come with the staff recommendation. If council is happy with the staff recommendation, it won't be pulled. If they want more fulsome discussion or want to amend a recommendation, then it'll be pulled and go to committee of the whole. So we'll go through that now. So our first item is the special council meeting minutes of May the 12th. The council meeting minutes from May the 12th. Next is the Innisfil Accessible Advisory Committee report dated May the 11th. I would just point out that I believe next week is Accessibility Week. So we'll be hearing a little bit more about that then. Next is staff report. This well, we've already done C1, sorry. C2, the action tracking list update. I just want to comment, if I could, that this is fabulous, the little placeholder to have. I always save this on my computer, so when I get calls from residents wondering where certain things are, like where we are in the process, I can refer to it. And I really do appreciate having that item brought forward. And I agree that as opposed to quarterly, that doing it twice a year is probably more appropriate. Next is item D1, the Sports Hall of Fame. Councillor Ices.
I'd like to refer that to the consent list, please.
Thank you. And item D2, the OPA in Cookstown. I have one quick question. I don't think I need to refer it. I just wanted to know if someone could tell me whether I'm assuming there's not wastewater allocation or capacity for this project right now. So this would have an H on it when if it goes through. And I'm getting a nod from Ms. Nostrom, so thank you so much. Appreciate that. And then item E is bylaws. We have none this evening. Item F1, that's the correspondence from Bradford. Councillor Alex Waters. Refer that, Councillor?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay. Item F2, the council discretionary fund request from Nanterre Shores High School. F3, the correspondence received from Councillor King. I just want to make a quick comment. It says it's confidential. It's actually the attachment or the letter from Councillor Payne was confidential, but she did want it to be known that her leave of absence commencing immediately is due to medical reasons. And I know I can speak for all of council when we say that we're looking forward to her healthy return to us in the fall. Item G, so we have the proclamation for National Deafblind Awareness Month, 2 Police Service Board meeting minutes, and the Library Board minutes. Did anybody have any of those items they wanted to pull? Seeing none, then we'll move now to the consent list continued. And we'll go to the next slide and the items that we are pulling. So we'll go to, those are the items we're pulling, and then we're deeming everything we haven't discussed as being declared. The mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Nicol, Councillor Ices, all those in favor? That is passed. So the first item that we're dealing with is item, so first we have to resolve into committee the whole, and that is moved by Councillor Van Berkel and Councillor Fowler, all those in favor? That is carried. And we go to item D1. Councillor Ices.
Thank you, Your Worship. I wanted to pull this item, obviously, because it came from my notice of motion, and I remember very clearly when I brought that to council. I believe it was the last meeting that we had in council chambers. So, you know, the world has definitely changed, but I think I wanted to just bring this to light to have a bit of a good news story that we can focus on in our town, and that's the creation of a sports hall of fame. And it's something that we're going to need our community to grab a hold of and make it a place where we can recognize all those fabulous people and volunteers and in the world of sports. And I was sharing with Mrs. Botham earlier that you know, I have this vivid memory of going to Pollyanna Sports, which is just in Innisfil Beach Road, where the Simcoe tackle business now operates. This shed with you know, the wood stove in it, and you'd come in there for your first pair of skates or your first bit of hockey equipment, and Jerry Polly he was just the face of the place, and he had such a passion for helping, you know, youngsters like myself get their first sports gear. And I know Mr. Polly is well recognized in the community as an Innisfil Lion, and it's those type of people that we wanted to acknowledge, and as we start from scratch, it's going to take everybody's little story to get this going, because as it says in the report very well, like, this is about, you know, our stories of Innisfil in sports, and whether it's, you know, the memory of the Churchill 2-lane curling club, or if it's the memory of the broomball league in the 50s that Innisfil was, you know, really the hotspot for broomball, and it continues to be that. So there's all these things that we can build on in building this Sports Hall of Fame. So there's a bit of excitement here that I wanted to bring forth by pulling this motion. I guess I got way ahead of myself with my preamble, and Councillor Nicol's going to ask me for a seconder for this. So maybe I'll do that right now. Councillor Nicol, thank you. So I did have a few questions for Ms. Botham. I know a lot of other communities have different categories that people can be involved in, whether it's you know, a builder category or mentors or athletic achievement. I didn't see that specifically in the report. Is that something that we would talk about or consider?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Ices. Yes, as we put this together and going to a virtual Our Stories concept, most municipalities currently have like a wall or something within a facility, which we think we will grow to, but we thought it was better to start with getting, like Councillor Ices said, those stories, those people, getting those archives out and talking about them. So we didn't want to put a category on them. We've named a few areas like coaches or, like Councillor Ices said, facilities that you might be in, you know, whether you nominate somebody or you want to tell a story yourself. We will gather, Kate from the library has working with us on the Our Stories piece. She'll gather all that information. That's her forte. We'll then sit down and see what kind of information we get, and whether staff can categorize themselves, or we might end up having to do a committee or coming back to council for assistance on what we want to include. And anything that we do get will go in our history. We'll take anything and everything. So like Councillor Ices says, this is really community driven. So we're pretty excited about, you know, getting as much information, and then we'll make our categories based on what we see from the community.
Thank you. So I guess what comes out of this report is a bit of a challenge to the community to bring these names forward. Can you maybe let us know what the next steps are?
Absolutely. Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Ices. So the next steps, our communication departments are ready to roll out a call out tomorrow. So there will be a press release go out. They're currently finalizing a new web page on our website. It will be under innisfil.ca, Sports Hall of Fame. On that website, you will find a nomination form. Whether you nominate somebody or just want to tell a story, there'll be a form that you will fill out, and then you'll send it in to the leisure team for us to do our magic with, hopefully. So keep an eye on the media tomorrow. A media release will come out, but you can always find it on the town website under Sports Hall of Fame. Oh,
Thank
and
you.
sorry, Councillor Ices, if I can make one more comment, because we did talk about this today. We're not putting a deadline on it. So it's not for 1 or 2 weeks. We want the stories to continue to come in, and we'll continue to, you know, reach out to the community as needed.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. It'd be great to be able to think about sports in our community again, even though that's not able to be done at this time. But this fall, I would think that's something that we can look forward to.
Thank you, Councillor Ices. Other questions or comments on this item? I just want to add that I think the last funeral I went to in person was Harry Squibb, and he and Mrs. Squibb were known as Broomball, Mr. and Mrs. Broomball. I didn't know about that. I knew he was one of our employees and he was the greatest grader operator that ever lived, but I didn't know that he and his wife were inducted into the Broomball Hall of Fame. So there's lots of stories, I think, that we can learn, and I really appreciate you bringing this forward, Councillor Ices. I would say that at the time, at our last meeting before the pandemic, I guess I probably didn't put the emphasis on sport and how much we need it for our mental health as I now understand after this pandemic. So thank you for that. All right, so we've got a mover and a seconder on receiving this for information. All in favor? And that is passed unanimously. Next is item F1, and that was Councillor Waters.
Before I get caught up by Councillor Nichols, can I have a seconder, please? we all walk in fear of Councillor Nichol catching us. Thank you very much. So I asked this to be pulled because I want council to really take a sober second thought at agreeing to strongly support the bypass in north of Bradford. I'm just going to make 3 points because I thought Claire did a pretty good job, and also our other speaker too, Linda Ford, did a good job in presenting some of the issues. One is that a lot of people say it's going through the Holland Marsh. It's going through the Holland Wetland Complex. That complex is the largest wetland associated with Lake Simcoe. Wetlands have some very, very serious things that they do for us. And I'll speak from experience because I used to be the National Education Coordinator for Ducks Unlimited Canada, which is Canada's largest wetland conservation organization. So I have a good understanding of these things, and I have a huge appreciation for what they do. So wetlands, they act as huge habitat for animals of all species, whether aquatic birds or insects, those types of things. They're nurseries where those birds and insects and everyone have broods and babies. One of the most important things is they filter. They filter and take up phosphorus. They take up contaminants. They slow down water in terms of floods and all those things. So this wetland complex has a huge contribution in terms of improving the quality of the water that's in Lake Simcoe. So to put a highway through the middle of it, and we've heard twice now where MPO has approved highways through sensitive wetlands, within years, those wetlands become inadequate. They're no longer performing their function. Even though the MPO has said they will not be impacted, years down the road, those wetlands are non-existent. So in 15, 20 years, this wetland, if depending on type of techniques they use to go across it, will be unfunctional as it originally designed. So filtering and taking up phosphorus, all those things that it does right now, it will not be doing in 15 years' time because of our short-sightedness. A second point is that what I want to make is that one thing that our previous two speakers didn't make, and one is a pet peeve of mine, is that in continuous reports they say one of the largest threats to Lake Simcoe is salt, and they say by 2050 Lake Simcoe could be officially dead because the salt levels in this lake will be too high to support any type of habitat, except maybe saltwater fisheries at that time, which we might have to end up doing. But the lake will be officially dead because of salt. The major vectors for salt into Lake Simcoe is urban infrastructure, roadways, not parks, but parking lots, all those. If you're going to put a highway across this wetland and go over 2 bridges, which go right into Lake Simcoe, salt content is going to go up dramatically from this single point. So my concern is that there's no mitigation. There's not something you can do here to stop that from happening. You either build it and don't have the salt contributing to the lake, or you build it and you have to deal with it and the consequences that go along with it. The last point I'd like to make is that we sit here and we talk about how we're looking forward in the future in terms of new urbanism, in terms of sustainable urbanism. Our whole reason for talking about the orbit is around green infrastructure, green transportation. This undermines everything about the orbit. So, so people will now be able to take their car to Toronto quite easily, according to the Ministry of Transportation, but even though they don't provide the proper statistics for it. So, it undermines the orbit hugely. And if we're going to have any credibility at all around the orbit, we need to think this holistically. And so I'm asking council that just because we disagree with our neighbors doesn't mean, we're in battle with our neighbors. People have the right to disagree with each other. And if your brother or sister is doing something wrong, you can tell them that in good faith, that you have a strong enough relationship that you'll get past this. And I know we want to do this because we want to be good neighbors, but good neighbors sometimes have to speak the truth. And I think here this is an old project that's been on the paper and they want to get it done, and they've never done a proper environmental assessment. The species at risk legislation wasn't even on the books when they did this EA. So if we're going to allow this to go through, at least a new EA needs to be part of it, and they can't be building bridges and intersections prior to finishing off all these studies. There's just too many ifs about this whole project. And so I would appreciate that if council would hold off in giving its strong support to this until we have more information. And at that time, we can make a proper decision. But I think, you know, just to do this because we want support for our bypass in Cookstown, I think is a wrong way to do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So I'm going to suggest you probably don't want to move this motion then.
You're correct. I'm having them. Would like this to be turned down.
So you're suggesting a different recommendation. You're suggesting that this
that we defer this indefinitely until you know, the proper studies have been done.
Okay, so the recommendation then from Councillor Waters is that this motion be deferred until the proper studies are done. Can I put words in your mouth, Councillor?
That is fine.
Okay, and then I'll ask your seconder if they are on board with that. I'm seeing a no. So is there a seconder for Councillor Waters, Councillor Van Berkel? Okay, so we have a new recommendation on the floor, which is that this that council defer this motion. There we go. Council defer until further studies are done, or until complete studies are done, or whatever the wording is you want, Councillor Waters. Okay, so now we'll have discussion on the motion that's on the floor. Councillor Van Berkel.
Thank you, Your Worship. So it seems to me that, you know, it doesn't matter whether we strongly support this or not support this at all. It's going to go through anyway. But, you know, we should voice our opinions, and exactly what Alex just did. And since we've had the public meeting, I've had a chance to really look into this. And as you know, I was on council way back when this was first proposed. And of late, you know, there's been a lot of things approved where we skip, you know, environmental assessments and do whatever with MZOs. And I think, you know, the norm has become, let's build it and then worry about it. And I think that's totally wrong. I really do. I mean, with any of these projects, I think we need to do proper environmental assessments. And if we, you know, just a little story, if I go back 60 years, my father used to take me fishing on Lake Simcoe, and in the middle of the summer, if you were thirsty, he'd say, well, you know, have a drink. You got a cup and you drank out of the lake. Nobody ever got sick. If you did that today, you'd probably wind up in a hospital. And that's not because, you know, that came naturally. That's because we did it. We did it. So we're doing all these things at what cost? At what cost to our future? What cost to our children? What cost to our grandchildren? And herein lies my problem. I mean, I know this is going to go through, but we really need to go through the proper procedures. We need to do proper environmental assessment and not start building and worry about it tomorrow after it's built. We need to worry about it today before it happens. And I totally agree with Councillor Waters' scenario on it, that, you know, these wetlands dry up and whatever after these highways have been built, because we've seen it. I mean, the proof's in the pudding. So I agree with this recommendation that we, you know, defer this indefinitely until, you know, the proper steps have been taken, and maybe then we can look at it again. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Councillor Feller.
Thank you, Worship. If I may make reference to item D3 in regards as it correlates to this. On page 3, it says the results of these studies are detailed in environmental assessment documentation, which for this project, a TESR, is going to be prepared, but they're going to be posting it in late 2022. So in other words, they're going to be doing the groundwork, and as they go, they're going to be doing the assessments, and then they're going to be getting the public involved. That's the appearance of it, as it seems. I can't agree with that. You don't build a house on a foundation that's not yet complete. You find out what impact you're going to be having on the environment, what it's going to be doing to the surrounding lands, and then, you know, you let people know this is what we're doing. You don't juggle it at the same time. It's a recipe for disaster. I can't back that. I disagree with that completely. So I'm backing Councillor Waters with this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Davidson.
Thank you. I have to concur with what's been spoken about. It seems like we put the cart before the horse. And I know that wetlands, once they dry up and they're no longer a wetland, they can be approved for development. And that means that this particular wetland 30 years from now would be developed. And I can't see that happening. And I do like our neighbors to the south, but I think this is being rushed through. And I have to concur with council right now that we need to defer this until we receive an EA updated information. How can you take something 20 years old and implement it today? I think I'm hearing your noise of your computer, Mayor Dolan, or something. There's a radio. Somebody's got their mic on somewhere. So yeah, I have to concur with council. We need to really defer this until we get more information and more up-to-date information before we destroy Lake Simcoe. Thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor Ices?
Thank you, Worship. I guess first of all, I would like to say that I do appreciate everybody's comments on this issue, but I just think we're just way out of our lane here as far as taking a stand as a town on these issues that are way beyond us. Like the congestion that is trying to be dealt with at Bradford is real. You know, I do have a problem with, you know, somebody from Vaughan commenting on a road that they've hardly driven on. And I just think that for us to comment on it in this way, it's been said that it's going to be built in some way, regardless of if we say, you know, we're in favor of it or not. And it seems like we're saying it's either a road or not a road. Like I've driven on over the Everglades in Florida, and somehow they seem to have a mix of traffic and wildlife, and I just think it can be done, and we're not in the position to be able to comment on that at this level. It seems like we're making a strong issue about it's an important issue, but there are other channels that some of these comments should go to, and for it to come through here, I guess I have a problem with that. So I will not be in favor of the deferral. Thank you.
Thank you. Did I see another card? Councillor Nicol.
Thank you, Your Worship. Procedurally, I wasn't sure if I was the original seconder because it wasn't stated, so I was frowning because I wasn't sure if it was me or not. So I didn't say anything on the deferral itself. To me, I think the additional information from Bradford, West Gillenbury, and town staff should have helped everyone better understand this. And unfortunately, this east-west link should have already been built years ago, both sidelined by previous governments. Although we received a few dozen emails against supporting this link, the overwhelming majority were not even residents of Innisfil or even Bradford. By voting on this, we're supporting principle of a link, but there's much work to be done. The highway's not going to start tomorrow. Even the federal government didn't feel the need for a new EA here, unlike they did for the 413 proposal. I think this is a needed highway, and it does make sense to support our neighbors to the north. And as Councillor Waters said, you know, we will eventually be asking them for support for the east-west link in Cookstown. So I'll go with the will of council, but I support Councillor Ices too, where I think this is going to happen. And as he said, we may be out of our lane here. So I think it was just a nod to our neighbors to the south, but we'll see where council goes with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Arsati.
Thank you for your patience. Sorry, I should keep my mouse on one computer at a time. You know, it's hard when you're looking at something that there's a great need for people to get to work, to remove the congestion on roads that we have, and provide a safe opportunity for people to get to work. And when we look at the reduced traffic on Yonge Street and everything else for people that have to get to the 404 and traveling through Bradford, I can understand their need for this. It reminds me a lot of the need for the bypass in Cookstown to reroute the traffic off of the main street. And I think we're all concerned with, with the environment, and Councillor Waters, has the, best knowledge base in that because of his career. And I really, toss between this because, when I looked at the report, I went into the articles on it from, I'm just back to my other thing here on the Bradford Bypass that you could hit in the link and all the different information. And I was just thinking about Councillor Icey's comment about, sort of out of our territory. And I care about the wetlands, and I certainly care about, what's happening. But this portion of the wetland is not in Innisfil, it's in Bradford. And making recommendations on land in Bradford as opposed to Innisfil, I just wonder how that's, I kind of feel like it could be like a poker game for support for, for Cookstown and that. And maybe I'm, going on and on here, but I think the need for the bypass is great. And I think that for me, we're out of the area in looking at that wetland. I care about it. I'm, you're almost convincing me there, Councillor Waters, but deferring it till when. And as Councillor Nichols said, we've gotten emails from people that are opposed, but we have so many residents in Innisfil that use that route, that use Yonge Street, that go through Bradford, that have to take the 404. When my husband and I are going anywhere, we use the 400, we use the 407, we use the 401 and 404. We use highways because it gets us there quicker and it saves traffic into local towns. I really feel that, it needs the support.
Thank you, Councillor Waters.
Thanks everyone for your comments. I appreciate those and for and against this. However, I will comment on that we should stay in our own lane. We did not get into this lane because we asked to. We were asked by Mayor Bradford to weigh in on this. He wants strong support from us. So we've been asked. So we're in the lane because we're being asked, not because we're sticking our nose in their business. I'm the last person who would stick my nose in somebody else's business if I'm not asked. I was asked. So here I am trying to make an educated decision, and I asked for the first deferral so that we could have this, this really good debate on why it's important. And I'm so glad that we've had this opportunity. So we are in the lane because we were asked to be here. So and then somebody was talking about the Everglades. The Everglades take billions of dollars every year to make sure they operate as naturally as they possibly can. You drive across them on that one highway and you think the Everglades exist the way they are. There's billions of dollars that goes into maintaining those wetlands because they have to, otherwise all those animals will die. And so it's a little truth that no one knows, but they're all managed down there. No longer, is that a natural wetland anyways, that the wetland would dry up if it wasn't for the ongoing management of that place. This wetland is going to dry up, and it's the largest wetland contributing to Lake Simcoe. And it's what keeps Lake Simcoe as clean as it is, because there's a ton of extra nutrients and contaminants that come through the Holland Marsh. And that's what that wetland does. It prevents that from coming in. You put a solid spit across there with a bridge just over the river, all that is going to stop. And it's going to fill in, and it's going to be developable in 15 years, and maybe that's what everyone wants down there. But it's the largest major wetland that keeps this water body clear, and it's going to be a shame if we say, without being honest to our neighbor, that I understand some of the issues you're having, but potentially blocking that wetland from ever functioning again is a mistake. And I think, and all we're asking is, we said till when? Well, we want to see the studies. When the studies are all, then if they say it's a good thing and they've got the proper technology to bridge the wetlands, if that's what they're going to do, then we can give our full support. So we're not asking, not to support it. We're just saying when the studies are done, then we'll weigh in with a proper educated guess. Otherwise, our children are going to see the end of that wetland, guarantee it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm gonna just break in here for a second, and then I'll go to Councillor Van Berkel. So first of all, I hate it that the thing that takes the most time on our agenda tonight is something that we have absolutely no control over, and something that the only reason it's in front of us, and I will fall on the sword here, is because I asked at the South Simcoe Mayor's meeting, Bradford, is there anything we can do to support you? And that's why we were asked to support this. So it's on me. I'm why this is here. And I did that because we've supported this. We, as in this council, has supported this since 2002. We went to delegations with the former ministers of transportation, with the chair of York Region at the time, Chair Fish, and the mayor of East Gwillimbury and the mayor of Bradford and ourselves, and supported this. So it's been on the books for a long time, and Ms. Ford actually made me feel old when she said, this was done so many years ago that we weren't old enough to be to know about it, but I was on council then. So I was on council when they were looking at the 427 extension. They were looking at the Highway 26 that is now built between Stainer and Collingwood. That was at one point started to be built, and it looked like an abandoned airfield. It was just left in pavement. And the 427 extension and the Bradford Bypass were all kind of approved or in that in the hopper, I'll say, and then everything fell off the table. And I would argue that it wasn't. I think Ms. Malcolmson used the word, it was killed. It wasn't killed. It was stopped just because of funding, not necessarily because of environmental concerns of the day. I totally accept the fact that things have changed since then, and that there needs to be more robust studies. I saw in the report from Mr. Deloy the list of the studies, and it goes on and on and on. Agricultural impact assessment, air quality impact assessment, archaeological assessment, cultural heritage assessment, drainage and hydrology, erosion and sediment, fish and habitat, existing conditions and impact, fluvial geomorphology, I don't even know what that is, and on and on and on. There's another 10 after that. So that kind of convinced me that they were going to do their homework. But the point is, we're spending too much time on something we have absolutely no say over. And the only reason it's here is because I said, can we do anything to help? Just to my friends who have been doing their best to lobby us, I do have one quick comment there, because it's happened quite a few times now. And I really think that that people who are trying to lobby us and are using these MailChimps or whatever they are, really doing yourself a disservice. It does no good. When I get 6 or 7 or 20 or 30 emails that are worded exactly the same way, I don't pay any attention to them, none at all. Now, if somebody takes 5 minutes to write their own words and send me their thoughts, absolutely, I will read it and take it into consideration. But these issues of just filling up our mailboxes with these contrived emails that somebody else wrote, and then someone clicks and you get a whole bunch of them worded the same, you're not doing yourself any favors if the idea is to convince convince council to move in it, because it's about the quality of the message, not about the number of times we receive it. That's what I look at. And I know very well from the last election that this project was important to a lot of people in Innisfil. I think I received maybe 20 or 30 emails. I can tell you I heard at twice as many doors, when are you going to build? When are we going to get that road built? So those are my comments, and I'll go to, I think I saw another hand, Councillor Van Berkel.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I don't think anybody's arguing with you. And I don't think anybody said here that we don't need that bypass. What we said is, you know, when they do it, it has to be done properly, not with a 20-year-old EA. You know, right here in Bel Air Beach for the water management, you know, the EA was 5 years old and we got to redo it. So that's all we're saying is get all of your ducks in place. I know that no matter what decision we come here tonight, that it doesn't matter, it's going to go through. But we need to voice our opinion because we were asked, and we will support it once all these studies are done. That's my take on it.
Thank you, Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Worship. I confer with Councillor Waters and Councillor Van Berkel. It appears that it may come across that we're saying that we don't want the highway. That's not what I believe we're saying. What I'd like to say is that we're not saying no, but please give us the tools to say yes. Do it properly, make sure everything's in order, and then we can fully support this and make sure everything is above board. That's just the only way, it's the right way to do it.
Thank you, Councillor. But you understand if we say no or yes means nothing to anybody. It's you know, the people who are the municipalities that are actually doing all the studies will lead this. But I think we've had just good discussion. Unless there's anybody who needs to say something, we can call the vote. Oh, Councillor Member.
Just one more comment, Your Worship. The thing is, what we're saying is we are on Lake Simcoe. That's Lake Simcoe is ours. That's where we live. They don't. We live there. And that's what gets affected. Not our community, but our lake gets affected. And that's all we're trying to protect. And the only way to protect that here is to do the proper studies and then endorse it.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none. Oh, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I concur with Councillor Van Berkel there. Innisfil owns 18 miles of shoreline. I think you made a comment yourself, Mayor, a couple of weeks ago that without Lake Simcoe, we wouldn't have Innisfil. We are the largest municipality on Lake Simcoe. If we don't stand up and take a concern for it, then we've got a problem. And maybe I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure on the 18 miles of shoreline. So I think we need to wait till the right information is there, that we have up-to-date facts, not 20-year-old studies, and then we can make the right decision in supporting our neighbor. Thank you.
Thank you. You are close, Deputy Mayor. Georgina beats us by a little bit, but we're second. Councillor Waters, and then we're going to call the vote because we spent a lot of time on this.
I'm just going to say that we lose all credibility on the orbit and our green transportation. The idea of building train transit to Toronto is to lessen the need for the automobile along this potential bypass. And so if we're going to allow this to go ahead, then the whole orbit and the GO train and the green transit plan is a farce, because we're saying we're picking the car over green transit. And it doesn't. So that's what we didn't know 20 years ago. When council voted on this 20 years ago, there were a whole bunch of things they didn't know. So we know a lot more about the environmental issues. We know that we're going to try to reduce the carbon footprint of cars because we're building green transportation. And that's looking forward. And so I think if we wait to see what all the studies say, that will reinforce the way we're going in terms of the orbit and the green transit that we've chosen. There won't be a need for that bypass because of the future that we're looking for in Innisfil and not for our neighbors down south. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll call the vote. All in favor of being deferred until further studies are completed? That's 1, 2, 3, 4. Those opposed? So that's defeated. So now we go back to the original motion. So that was a tie, so it was defeated, but I'm gonna solve the problem right here, because now what we're gonna do is gonna go back to the original motion, and we're gonna be 4-4, and that's gonna be defeated again. And so I think going back to the motion to deferred, if I could, I'll call to the clerk. The deputy clerk, perhaps, if you could give me some advice. So we're in a stalemate. So this is going to be, this will be a tie and deferred. So can we go back and re-vote on the motion to defer?
No, you can't, Your Worship. It has been voted upon. You would have to go back to the main motion, or if someone has a alternate motion. Staff did look at this because of the volume of correspondence that was received, and we do have an alternative motion that might be more palatable for council. Would you like to see that?
Thank you, Deputy Clerk, if you want to put that forward. Oh, so we have to vote on the main motion first. So let's go through that. So all in favor of strongly supporting the bypass, those in favor? Those opposed? So that's tied, so that's defeated. And now we'll go to the motion that staff looked at kind of a middle of the road. So you just need to read the last statement. And ask if we have a mover or a seconder for this motion. Councillor Nicol is moving. Councillor Ices is seconding. Questions or comments on this motion? I just ask council to keep in mind that really what we do doesn't matter. If we're silent on this, there's 444 municipalities in Ontario, probably, you know, probably 430 have been silent on this, and it's not going to make any difference. But if we want to consider some sort of support, we could consider this, or we can just not move forward with anything. Councillor Waters.
I think just because we're not being silent, we were asked, we're voicing our opinion, and I agree. We don't have a say in this. This is going to come down to somebody else, but we can at least have an opinion and we express. They asked for our opinion, they asked for our support, so it does matter. If we don't give it, the province is going to take that there's questions out there, and in the public opinion, they may back off and do this properly. So I think it is important, one way or the other, that we vote on something tonight, that we turn it down completely and let them go back to the drawing board in terms of doing a proper environmental assessment, which they should have done all along. Ramming this through the way they're going to is not the way to go. So I think.
Sorry, let me just confirm though, Councillor Waters, your motion was just to defer our support. Okay, so that was just staying silent on it. That isn't saying, no, don't do it. That was just staying silent on it. That's what I meant by, you know, that was my comment. If I'm making any sense. Did I see other Councillor Orsatti? And then we've really got to move along on this because.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, so with the last paragraph on this, does that not, you know, provide the balance in that? Because it's saying that the town would support it, but there has to be a thorough, transparent environmental assessment of the 400 with emphasis on state-of-the-art environmental design. So does that not address the environmental concerns? A thorough and transparent environmental assessment?
So first I need a mover and a seconder to put this on the floor. I thought I had it. I did. I had Councillor Nickel, and who was the seconder? Councillor Ices. I apologize. You're right. I did. I apologize. So let's just take a vote on this, and then we'll see where it goes. And if it doesn't pass, it doesn't pass, and we'll get on with the rest of our meeting. All in favor of this motion? Those opposed? So it's defeated. Okay, so we'll move on. The next item is a rise recommendation, and I'll ask for a mover and a seconder. Councillor Deputy Mayor Davidson and Councillor Van Berkel. All agreed. And the recommendations, the resolutions be adopted, the adoption of what we've discussed tonight, a mover and a seconder. Councillor Ices and Councillor Waters, all those in favor? That is carried. Are there any notices of motion? We've received none. And announcements. Any announcements this evening? Councillor Nickel.
I know I shared with council last night as well, but I just want to share that there was a post on social media about a black bear sighting in the area of the 20th Side Road in the 3rd line about 2 days ago. Happily, our town alert system, the Stay Informed Innisfil, has already sent over anyways with the possibility of bear sightings and how to limit attracting them and where to report them properly. I guess it's just a good reminder that we still do live in a rural recreational community and we do interact with nature. So we still have to keep an eye out for things though. But
just a little bit there, Councillor Nickel, but I think we got the gist of the announcement. Did everybody get that? Now it says my internet's unstable, so I don't know, maybe it's me. Okay, sorry about that, everyone. Councillor Van Berkel. You're on mute, Councillor.
Question, if that's okay. It's not an announcement, but what I saw tonight with only 8 councillors, this 4-4 vote can happen often on this type of thing. Is there some way we can work that out, whether it's either carried or defeated with a 4-4 vote?
Yeah.
Because councillor is going to be gone for a little while, so.
Bylaw, when it's a tie vote, it's a defeated vote. So
it's not fair because there's only 8 people now. We're supposed to have a council of 9, not 8. So it's 4-4. You know, the mayor makes the deciding vote usually if it's 4-4.
I hear what you're saying, and we'll maybe take that to the clerk. But right now, what we did tonight with procedure is when it's a tie, it's defeated. And we had 3 motions, all of them were defeated. So, I mean, we had great discussion. Fortunately, it's an item that was just asking for our support. It wasn't a decision-making item. Deputy Clerk, did you want to make a comment?
Thank you, Your Worship. I was going to basically say the same thing that you had said, is this does happen on occasion. Happens to be ill or missing a meeting through other reasons, that it's one of the things that can occur. And, you know, unfortunately, motions can get defeated and there's no resolution to go with an item.
Thank you. And it does happen very rarely. Most times we are. Now everybody's frozen on my screen, so I think it's my internet again.
Sorry.
The recording has stopped.
I'm back. Sorry about that, everyone. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we've sold to 4 and 4 because we have 2 Alex Waters now.
Yes, sorry about that.
All right, and we lost the deputy mayor too.
I think we all got kicked out there for a bit, their worship.
Okay. We have the deputy clerk on the phone, so she's looking for something. So we were in announcements, so we didn't miss anything, I don't believe. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we have quorum, so we can continue. So is there any other announcements? So we've lost Councillor Van Berkel and we've lost the deputy mayor. So I had one announcement. If he's still with us, he might be gone, but is our interim CAO George Chaperoux with us? Well, then that's not going to be very much fun of an announcement. So maybe I'll save it for next time. I just want to let you all know that he has, he was given a, oh, there they are, they're back. We're all back now. I think we all got kicked out, everyone. I just want to let you all know that Dr. George Chaperoux was recognized by the Electric Distributors Association the other night for a lifetime achievement for his work. He was given the chair's citation, which was quite an honor. It's kind of like getting the lifelong standing achievement award at the Oscars. So it was quite an honor for him, and we were all very proud to see him get that. Does anyone else have any other announcements? Seeing none, maybe we should finish up here before we get cut off again. So confirming bylaw is moved by Councillor Van Berkel and seconded by Councillor Orsatti. All those in favor? That is carried. And finally, our adjournment is moved by Councillor Nicol and seconded by Councillor Fowler. All those in favor? That is carried, and I don't think we're recording anymore either. So have a good evening, everyone.
Right.
And
Take
we'll
it easy, yeah.
We'll see. I don't think we're off next week, right?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. Good night, everybody.
Night.
Everyone.
Good night.